eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Siosi, and you are tuning in to episode 80 of the It Will Come show. And today we are going to be talking about why you should be building a Slack community during this COVID-19 pandemic, global recession, all of the above. If you are tuning in for the first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. And remember, hit subscribe if you are interested in learning more about, everything from communities to technology, bridging those gaps, and generally the things that are coming out of my head, out of my bedroom during this time. So let's dive straight into it. Slack. If this is the first time you're hearing about Slack as a tool or as a company, they've been around for a good number of years, and you might have heard them in the news. Them alongside Zoom have been two of sort of the main tools, communication tools, that are populating the headlines. So if you're not familiar, again, they are essentially a team-based, company-based messenger app. It's way more than just a messenger app, but generally for people who are trying to understand what it is and how it's actually useful, at a fundamental level, it is a messenger app, but it does a lot more in terms of how it can integrate tools, everything that you might be using right now, straight into the messenger interface. And so, because I've been a fan of them since the very early days, it's been amazing to see just how much Slack has grown over the years, and to see because of all the mind space that they've been able to capture right over the years, and because they have such a strong advocate network, it's no surprise that during this time, during COVID-19, as people are going to work from home, that you're seeing Slack's name just pop up more and more. And this is, one, a result of them having just a solid product for people to naturally share more and more about them. And two, just their brand awareness. They're very smart in their marketing. They're very smart in their customer support. And as a whole, they're just a very sound company. And interesting story, one thing I learned about Slack was that in the early days, the creators of Slack, which includes, I think, James Butterfield, they actually created this messenger app to sort of solve their own problem. They created it for themselves. They were originally a games company. And then it just so happened that the moneymaker was in this sort of happy accident, which is now Slack. And if you're wondering what Slack means, let me just get it out for you. So Slack, most people don't even know this, but Slack actually stands for Searchable Log of All Communication and Knowledge, right? So as I was saying, Slack isn't just a messenger app. It is a searchable log of all communication and knowledge. So it's meant to sort of play as like a part wiki, part messenger app, part communication tool. And there have been many throughout the years of, enterprise communication tools. And so, Slack definitely isn't the only person in the market when it comes to communication and knowledge, but they have increasingly made their way into larger and larger companies. Just as sort of a side note, the last company I worked for actually ended up having a very good relationship with the Slack guys, and was invited to one of their customer success summits to actually talk about how we managed to incorporate Slack into a large enterprise company. And this company essentially was Slack's first enterprise company in the APAC region. And I was a very big advocate, and I just wanted to see Slack adopted because I saw how powerful it was. And luckily, the company ended up accepting it, rolling it out, and now it's just become part of their day-to-day, alongside Zoom, which also then started to get adopted. And this is something that can happen for a lot of sort of incumbent companies or companies that are still stuck in sort of like the old email workflow. And that's not to say that email is going anywhere soon. Email is going to be around forever as long as there is the internet. So I think it'd be silly to try and kill it, as many have tried to do before. But what Slack does do is allow people to communicate in a more real-time fashion, real-time manner, so they can respond better. In some instances, Slack might not be the best thing because it requires a bit of discipline from just a cultural standpoint. You need to know how to put in, etiquette guides. You need to know, inform your entire workforce about how to actually communicate effectively in Slack. Because remember, it's just a tool, and cultures and people will just magnify what's already there with the tools. And so, as part of the rollout for Slack at this last company I was at, it involved a change management process. It involved, actual training. And for those who are using Slack and wondering, like, why would you need formal training for Slack? For those who are much more established companies, right, who've been around for decades or maybe even a century, um, getting a huge ship to turn isn't always the easiest. And so you have to really take into account this whole change management process, which is, essentially guiding people through these changes, because it's not necessarily the tool that they cannot deal with. Often it's actually just the amount of changes that might be going on in their organization. So we call it cognitive overload, and it's just about helping to guide them together, right? Because if you just sort of switch the flip the switch on and expect everybody to just get it when they've got 100 competing priorities, that's not the best and most effective way of getting adoption or gaining adoption, right? So yes, that's essentially Slack in a nutshell. I can try to, maybe in another episode, I'll actually take you guys through some of the Slack communities that I've helped set up over the years. But this episode, we're just going to be looking at why you should be considering Slack. Okay, so here's another one. Slack's set to accelerate from coronavirus and work from home. All right, as I was mentioning, Slack is just being mentioned more and more in general news and media. Okay, so if you're interested from a stock perspective, this is not financial advice, but if you look into the fundamentals of this company, it is very sound, very solid, and I think they are set up for a lot of future success as well. So here, not only does Slack save a company money, but by not requiring large software suites, but Slack saves company time through seamless collaboration and developer APIs. That is something that I would definitely say Slack does do, right? I was mentioning how you can integrate any tool that your company currently uses, or your team. Slack can integrate most of them because they've just taken on a very collaborative approach with most sort of partner vendors or anyone who wants to work with them. That's been their attitude from the early days, and it's been great to actually see them stick to that and that attitude of we will work with anybody who wants to work with us. So yeah, Slack's growth accelerating. 74% of organizations will shift some employees to remote work permanently. Yes, and as a result, Slack comes into play with that. Slack, the application is reportedly open 9 hours per day and boasts engagement of 90 minutes per day. Right, I'm looking here. Compare this to Facebook at 58 minutes, Instagram at 53 minutes, and YouTube at 40 minutes. Now, why do you think that is? This is most likely due to the fact that most people are working, right? And because most people are working, it's far easier to justify having something like Slack open at the workplace than it is to have Facebook. I know many companies even implemented policies whereby they actually had employees restricted from using any form of social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., right? Because they were deemed as distractions. Now, unless you're a social media manager that actually needs to have these social media apps open to do your work, most of the time people will not find it productive to be on those networks. Slack, however, it's used for team communication. So it really is left open most of the day, most of the time. So that, spells well in terms of for the company to be able to have more engagement, right, in general. So Slack's user growth has been parabolic, I would agree. There was something called shadow IT, if you haven't heard of this term before. Essentially, a lot of companies who had sort of command and control IT teams that needed to ensure they knew what everything was going on in terms of their IT within the company. There were essentially things like Slack that were creeping in because they were just so popular and so fun to use. And as a result, this phrase or term shadow IT actually started to increase more and more, whereby you'd have employees install these apps like Slack without IT even knowing about it. And as a result, over time, because it became such a popular app, IT teams and even executive teams would have to just adopt it anyways, because it had just creeped in from the ground up. So that's definitely one thing I learned about Slack, at least when I was helping to integrate it at an enterprise level, is that the best adoption definitely does come from the ground up, but in a large organization, you need to have it go both ways, right? You need to have grassroots adoption, but then you also need to have executive buy-in. So being able to get those two together will ensure that the adoption will be higher. Now, if you're a small startup, it's going to be a lot more easy. But generally, if you're looking at larger companies, that's what you'll need to look at. Okay, so yeah, that's Slack. Now again, I'm sharing a bit of both, like the technical sides, and then also the side from the economics of this company and how they are correlated, right? If you look at, again, the fundamentals of this company, it's very strong, very solid. And so if were looking to invest, again, this is not financial advice, it'd be worth taking a look at, because this is generally how I actually pick tech stocks. Is if it is something that I would use myself, then I usually expect it to do quite well. Just so far, my own past history of decisions have translated that way. So again, if you're watching the show for the first time, we'll always share the article links so you can have a look. But there's this article that breaks down from the Motley Fool, breaks down everything about Slack as a company, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Okay, so the next couple of articles I'm going to show are essentially ones about just looking at how people are increasingly setting up their own Slack communities. As I mentioned, Slack is not the only app or tool of its kind, but it is one of the most popular, and for a very good reason. And my sort of motto is, don't always follow everything that's popular, but things can become popular for good reasons too, if they're good. So here's one: the FEC International Community Slack channel created to foster support among entertainment center owners and operators, right? So just a lot more sort of traditional industries opening up Slack communities to be able to support their people. Let's have a look here. All right, so this is more just a type. Okay, so this is going to be a type form. But yeah, this is, it's interesting because Slack, it's focused on teams. It's, generally something that just gets rolled out to a lot of organizations from within. The sign-up process, there's no fancy landing page. So a lot of other groups, if they're essentially wanting to create a Slack community for their customers, or even just an alliance of people, then they'll have to create their own sales landing page. And I have seen this whereby people create type forms, right, to get access to a Slack community. Over here, how Microsoft Teams, Slack, Workplace from Facebook stack up. Okay, so these three, so Microsoft Teams and Workplace from Facebook are two competitors to Slack. And Microsoft Teams, Microsoft almost bought out Slack, if you don't know the history. And even though that didn't happen, and the reason why it didn't happen was because I think Bill Gates stepped in the last minute and said, hey, we can build our own thing. Like, we don't need to buy them. And so yeah, they ended up coming out with Microsoft Teams. And really, it's if you compare the two, like, very similar. All Microsoft Teams did was just copy what Slack was doing, and then put their own spin. Even their ads were actually quite similar. But hey, it is what it is. Microsoft were able to essentially roll out Teams to everybody that already owned their sort of Microsoft suite. So that's how they were able to sort of take back some market share from Slack. But it is what it is. It just sort of showed that Slack really was becoming a force to be reckoned with. And again, Slack just took on the attitude of like, hey, look, we wanted to work together, and okay, we're competing. But Slack has just a lot more sort of loyal advocates that love it for everything it stands for. Whereas with Microsoft Teams, it's just because it's added for free. And I think that's the main difference that's actually going to win out in the long term for Slack, in my opinion. Because Slack is focused on Slack completely, right? Microsoft Teams, they've probably got just one team that's dedicated to it as part of the whole Microsoft suite. Workplace from Facebook, I've heard about this, and I've played around with it, and essentially it's like a team professional version of Facebook. And in my opinion, actually that's not a good thing, because because you're so familiar behaviorally from from Facebook, when you're using Workplace from Facebook, at least in my experience, it felt like I was still doing something too social for work. Whereas Slack, it's different enough that you feel that you're at least getting some things done. And this perception is very important. So those are the three: Microsoft Teams, Slack, and Workplace from Facebook. So if you want to check out the other two, feel free to. Of course, this episode is about Slack. Now, again, so this article was actually talking about COVID-19, what measures are employers taking. So, again, I'm seeing just more and more articles about people setting up Slack groups, or Slack communities, as they're calling them, for their teams, projects, or companies. And let's go back. So technologies. So here on HRM Asia, they're talking about how to help their employees out. To facilitate seamless remote communication, it is encouraging teams to discover new solutions that work for them, such as Monday.com, Slack, and Zoom. Monday.com is not necessarily a competitor. They're more of a task management software like Trello or Asana. Slack is there, as I was mentioning, right? Slack and Zoom both often get talked about. And as you can see, it is seeing the average number of Zoom calls per day go up 300%. Slack messages are up 50%. Next up, again, just another example of other people setting up these Slack communities. All right, CX Connections, this has to do with customer experience. Again, it's probably going to go to landing page. Yep. So here, what makes this community so special? Right. And again, it's going back to people talking about communities, right? If you've been following along this show, I always talk about the power of communities, and during this time, during COVID, more and more people are seeing just how important communities are. And the reason for that, not just in terms of a normal neighborhood sense, but in a business sense, is because if you've only had customers, right, and you haven't developed relationships between them and your company, then you don't really have a sense of community. And that sense of community is what helps people coming back and choosing to support you during these down times. Right? They won't just see your product as a commodity, as something that is just, okay, I don't have to think about you. But if there's a relationship being built or developed between your brand and the customers themselves, you're going to be in a far better position during this time, because those people will be coming back to support you regardless of maybe even their own economic conditions, but they'll have invested relationships. And that is the difference between a network and a community. Network, think about them as loose relationships. Communities, think about them as tight, more intimate relationships between not just you and your customers, but with the customers between themselves. Okay. So, of course, wouldn't talk about Slack communities without talking about our own Slack community called the Pack. Essentially, it is a productivity accelerator and accountability group. We actually start the next round 14, on May 5th. If you'd like to learn more about it, I will share the link in the show notes, or you can just check out jointhepack.co. And essentially, yeah, we were using Slack, way before it was cool. So this is like 5 years ago, and we used Slack to just really show what could be done, right? If you could bring people that weren't necessarily just in a team or a company, but we actually brought different entrepreneurs, professionals together. They're all working on their own things, but working together still on their goals, right? And we've just been able to hit a lot of really good key results. We've been tracking that as a result of having used Slack. It made it a lot easier. So we were able to move on average as a whole, the group, right, from an average of about 5 out of 10 in terms of their productivity levels to about 7.8 on average in terms of their overall productivity levels. And in terms of how likely people would recommend us, 9.4 out of 10. So that's pretty awesome. We spent a lot of time focusing on the relationship side. It meant a little bit slower growth, but during this time of COVID, what is definitely being noticed is that we've had a lot of people return to the Pack, or people just more interested in it, right? And this is no surprise. So, and then finally here, again, if you're watching for the first time, I'm also involved in sort of the Bitcoin space, the blockchain space, and that is in line with my company Faya, who are sponsors of the show as well. And I wrote this article back in 2018, just having a look at a new competitor. They're in a different industry, but Discord. Discord is another messenger-based application that is probably took the path that Slack originally had, which was for the games industry, right? So Discord, if we have a look here, Discord app, a new way to chat with your communities and friends. So what I love about Discord is that because they're in the games industry or focused on gamers, their application is really focused on the community side, whereas Slack is focused specifically on teams. Even though I think there's a lot of potential for Slack. And sorry, let me show you here. Realized I wasn't sharing the screen. But yeah, this is Discord. And so if you actually test out Discord, you'll see just how well they do in terms of understanding community engagement, right, for their app. It could be used for business, but we tried moving people from our Slack on the professional side to Discord, and some of the professionals and the entrepreneurs were saying that it felt a little bit too gamery, right, in Discord. And understandably, Discord is focused on gamers. But from a function standpoint, I think Slack could learn a lot from Discord, right? That would actually be very useful back in Slack. But yeah, the article that I probably had up and you didn't see was this one, Crypto Community Apps, Discord versus Slack. And so I was just showing about how during the sort of ICO craze of 2017, if you don't know what an ICO is, it stands for Initial Coin Offering. It was sort of the crypto version of an IPO, an initial public offering. And during this time, a lot of companies were raising an insane amount of money through their cryptocurrencies. And as a result, there were these communities being formed, primarily on Discord, Telegram, and Slack. Now, I would say in the crypto community, probably there were more communities, more groups being created in Telegram and Discord. Discord probably being the best for that crypto community or that culture. And, I wrote this article just to sort of give people a look into why Discord was actually being used a little bit more than Slack, right? And again, I'll share this in the show notes so you can have a look. But there's an interesting thing around here. So a lot of these messenger apps are great for getting started, but they quickly become noisy and unmanageable after growing to around 100 to 150 users. So this has to do with something called the Dunbar number. So if you haven't heard about the Dunbar number, let me just bring that up for you. It is a suggested cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable relationships, right? And relationships in which an individual knows who each person is and how each person relates to every other person. All right, so have a think about this. So you can see here, right? Dunbar's number, typical number of people we can keep track of and consider part of our ongoing social network. So 150 tribe, 50 clan, 15 superfamily, 5 close friends. And, I've used this a lot when it comes to building groups and building intimacy. I always say like that first 100 to 150 people in whatever it is you're building are so vital, right? Because they form the culture for every other person that comes after. And so I've seen this even in tools like WhatsApp or, SMS groups. Whenever that group hits around, actually even 50, right? When it goes between 50 to 150, you're going to see sort of people just feeling like they can't keep up. And then what will happen is groups within the larger group will start to just break out and create smaller groups, right? And this is why I actually talk a lot about sort of lessons that we can learn from wolf packs. Wolf packs tend to go to about a max of 20, but with the ideal number being around 8 to 12. And I think this was confirmed as well in sort of the 2 pizza rule by, I think it was Jeff Bezos. 2 pizza rule. If you have a look here. Here you go. So the 2 pizza rule is a guideline for deciding how many attendees should be invited into a meeting. According to the rule, every meeting should be small enough that attendees could be fed with 2 large pizzas, right? And if you think about how many slices, that's about 8 to 16, right? So you can see here, 3 members, 6 members, 12 members, 50 plus members, right? Exactly what I was saying. All of these things are connected. And essentially it's like as you increase the number of connections or nodes in a group, the more complicated or complex communication can get. If you've ever played Chinese whispers, you can see what happens when one piece of information goes down the line to multiple parties. By the time it hits the end with increasing numbers, it just becomes not what the original message was intended to be. All right, so this is just something to consider, and sort of what goes on in the background of these groups or these communities that are formed, whether it be Slack, whether it be Discord, whether it be Microsoft Teams. These are the fundamentals that underpin the cohesion of groups on these tools or applications. So, yep, that's Discord. See here. However, since Slack's current business model focuses more on enterprise teams and not necessarily communities, the lack of features and accessibility on their free tier has hindered growth for a lot of crypto communities. So I mention this because if you are considering Slack, there is a limit, right, on sort of what you can do on the free tiers of the free tier of Slack, right? If you're looking to build a community, there's going to be a 10,000 message limit. So once you hit 10,000 messages, any sort of messages before that time, up to the 10,000, will be hidden, right? So you won't be able to search for them. So essentially what that does is it encourages you to, if you're really considering creating a Slack community, then essentially once you hit that point, you need to look at sort of paying for each of those customers thereafter. Now that could potentially get very expensive if you're looking at creating a large community on Slack. Again, because Slack is geared around teams, the pricing is also geared towards that as well. So if you're worried about pricing, you might want to check out Discord. But if you're really looking at sort of the more professional side and creating a really good experience, Slack community might be a good choice for you. One thing I can assure you is that Slack, because it's so well known, because there are so many integrations, because its adoption is really being grassroots, it's a solid company for the future from a financial standpoint, and it's also a solid application for just day-to-day use, right? You can definitely depend and rely on it to have a significant uptime, right? And uptime being its ability to stay online without any crashes. They actually have a URL, I think it's called status.slack.com, where you can actually check, and they'll show you in real time if there are any actual known issues or not. So this has always been useful, because I remember during my time or tenure at the last corporate company, I would check this. There was, I think, only once that Slack went down, and that they would just share messages and updates here automatically, so you wouldn't need to worry about needing to follow up with support or what have you. So yeah, when it comes to customer support, they have some heroic stories. Again, not showing you. Here we go. So yeah, status.slack.com. This is what they will usually share for everybody. So if you ever are wanting to figure out if it's client side or server side, you could just go to this page. All right. So with that, hopefully you found that a bit useful in terms of learning a little bit more about Slack, why I think it would be useful for you if you're looking to build a Slack community. And I'll create another episode to actually take you through some of the Slack communities that I've helped build over the years, and also the pack, what we're doing there, and how that could be applied for you as well. And so as always, remember, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.